Our first game of the day is the game between Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces and Fabiano Caruana. E4 by Jan, and this is an interesting game because with 4 rounds to go and Caruana being a point behind, is he going to go all out and play for a win and potentially risk losing? No. And that's already decided on the first move because he could have played the Sicilian in hopes of an imbalanced game, or e5. Knight f3, knight c6, and now Nepo has an interesting decision to make. Is he going to play bishop c4, bishop b5, the real only 2 ways to try to get a modern day advantage? Or I should say advantage in the modern day era is a better way of phrasing that sentence. Instead, he plays a 4 knights. And he plays a 4 knights with the Scotch. And this line with bishop to b4, I've studied this to try to potentially make this a weapon with the white pieces. This is just depressingly equal. But if you're leading the most important chess tournament that you can play, then you don't take any risk. After takes, bishop d3, black plays the standard move d5, Nepo takes, and here Fabiano plays a couple of moves that look like very scary. Of course, naturally is just recapturing, undoubling your pawns, and, you know, living to fight another day. Castles, moving your bishop, but those positions are very equal, and so Fabiano delays. He castles, and he's basically trying to get Nepo to take a second pawn, and leave his king in the middle and attack it. But Nepo doesn't do that, and then Fabiano delays capturing again and makes Nepo play this move. And now we're no longer in any sort of theory. And what's interesting is that in this position, I think, according to the computer, the critical move here for white is this move g4. And Fabi's baiting that out of Nepo. He wants Nepo to go for this so that now, you know, you imbalance the game. And in a perfect world, you get a position that looks like this. And you say, well, what's so good about this? I mean, white has 7 pawns, black has 5. White is winning. No, black will not trade queens to not go into an endgame. And black will say, bro, what 2 extra pawns do you have? You have tripled isolated c-pawns, you bozo. Like, what are they going to do? Run head into each other's butt? Like, come on. The phrasing on that sentence could have been a little bit better. Like, the pawns are not going anywhere, right? So he tries to get Nepo to bite into this, and Nepo just doesn't bite into it at all. Nepo plays a move which ultimately forces a simplification of some pieces, and after bishop e4, white is up a pawn, moves his queen very far to try to get c7, and we're going to have some more trades, and then ultimately we're going to have some more trades, and it's queen, rook, rook, and 4 versus queen, rook, rook, and 3, but one guy has a very weak c-pawn, and essentially the rest of this game is Nepo trying to promote his a-pawn, Fabiano preventing that from happening, but no one can make any progress. If anybody's playing this position for a victory, it is white, because of white's passed a-pawn, but again, even if you play a move, like for example, if let's say rook b7 were played here, we would get takes, and very important, you gotta hit the pawn from the back, and now rook comes to a7, and neither of these pieces can move. So they're both frozen, and then black is gonna start moving forward. So that's the way you defend. You have to defend from the other side, and now we just shuffle around a little bit. One guy wins a pawn, the other guy wins a pawn, and on move 41, they agreed to a draw. So not too much for an introductory game, and I know you're going to say, well, Fabiano should have played for a win. I don't know why you have a vague European accent when you say that, but Fabiano said afterward, why would I burn all my bridges now? I have 3 more rounds to win games. And I tried, you know, with black, and Nepo just wouldn't bite, so that's that. They make a draw. Easy enough. Okay, Kirill Alexienko versus Wang Hao. Now, this is an interesting game. Again, neither of these players are in the running to win the tournament. That doesn't mean that we don't look at their games. That would be mildly disrespectful, considering there's only 4 games to go. So again, Alexienko, just like against Fabiano Caruana, chooses not to engage in a fried liver, having not recently reviewed the lines of the Gotham Chess YouTube video, and instead plays the move d3. And now we have h6, and Fabiano did this against Alexienko as well, except he did it with the bishop on c5. But now we don't get the bishop moving out to c5. So in many of these positions, black will play g6 and bishop g7 and turn it into a fusion King's Indian, and it's just an imbalanced and interesting game. Wang Hao goes a step further and lashes out with g5, and not just g5, but also g4. So modern day chess, you can do this and essentially say, like, look, dude, your pieces are dumb. It doesn't matter that I've pushed my pawn all the way. Now, obviously, black is going to castle queenside because he's moved his pawns very far. Oh, never mind. He's going to open up the center of the board even though his king is there. Okay, all beginners everywhere are laughing at me now. Levy, you said not to trade in the center when my... Well, they're super GMs. Just because they do it doesn't mean you can do it. Plus, all of White's pieces are very kind of blocking everything, which is why he makes a trade. Knight to a5, and White castles. Black takes, White takes. Black develops the bishop to g7. So we have a position of two bishops versus bishop and knight. Very weird structure of pawns, like the... I don't know what this is, like a trio, and then we got this scatterbrain stuff going on over here, like a weird knight box, like the knight can travel in a square. Anyway, so we have e4, h5. Yo, Wang Hao, can you develop some pieces? Like, the beginners are watching, man, like, come on. Okay, knight comes back to e3 with the intention of utilizing the light squares. When you have knight and bishop versus bishop-bishop, one side is stronger on a color complex, and the other side gets the other color complex. So white is better on the dark squares. But it's ironic, well, because both of them can fight for dark squares. Only one of these pieces can fight for dark squares. But it's ironic because actually white might get to f5, which looks really nice. I have to admittedly, just concede the fact that getting a knight to f5 looks very nice. And now, well, we should have gotten it. I mean, I'm a little bit perplexed why this didn't happen earlier. Maybe it's because of the weakness on d3. But like, for example, knight to f5. Actually, he never moved his knight to f5. He actually went for d5 instead. He invested fully in this square because this pawn became a weakness, so he had to block the queen and the rook. Okay, fine. Bishop goes back to c8. Rook e1, and while black says, since you're not going to put anything there, I've won the battle for that square. And since I'm better on the light squares, because my bishop is better than your knight to fight for the light squares, because your knight is about 50-50, I will fight on the light squares myself. Takes, takes. Bishop b4, and now c5. And at this point, it looks like Wang Hao has an advantage. Why? He's activated his pieces, he's got a little bit more space, so Wang Hao is going to try to kick out the knight and do a little bit of damage. He trades rooks, he trades, and he plays a very important move here, queen to g6. Very professional move. Not just taking on d5, because then we would get queen g5, hitting everybody, literally everybody. Not literally everybody, but just about everybody important in this position, and we don't want that. So, queen to g6, doesn't let that happen. Now we get queen d1, and it's very clear that the guy wants to go queen a4, so naturally, how do we prevent that, ladies and gentlemen? Very good, by not preventing it whatsoever. Which was very strange, because in this position, Wang Hao had his big advantage of the game. He could have played this move b5, which would have led to a position where the queen has difficulties getting in. If it were to go to b3, then, well, queen takes pawn, and this is guarded. Of course, white can try to create some counterplay on the diagonal, but then, for example, you have c4, queen takes b5, giving the pawn back, and a very nice move, bishop h6. And the point is that you're getting into e3, and your queen is very strong. So actually, white is in some trouble here. But Wang Hao just didn't do that, which, I mean, that's how chess works. Sometimes you do things, sometimes you don't do things. And now white was able to create counterplay. And the game lasted 25 more moves, but I'm not going to lie, nothing happened. So at some point, black makes about 15 queen moves in a row. Not yet, because there's still pieces on the board. But now that the queens, now that the rooks are traded, black at this point begins to make about 15 queen moves in a row. Watch. Check, 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 takes. Okay, that wasn't quite 15 moves in a row, but 11 moves in a row of checks, and finally we have a queen capture. And at this point, Wang Hao was up a pawn, but the problem is that he just can't win this game. His extra pawn is here. That's, when you look around the board, that's the extra pawn, and if he ever moves it, the king will just get very weak. So he tried to, you know, move his pawns a little bit, but he had to give one back, and he just decided to repeat moves. So that's kind of your two appetizers of the day in 10 minutes time, and now we will dedicate a bigger amount of time to the decisive games of the day, which were very interesting, and they proved to be very important for the tournament standings. So we're going to kick things off with the game between Alexander Grishuk and Maxim Vachiligov. And this is a big one, because MVL is in contention to win the candidates and play Magnus Carlsen, and Grishuk not quite. He would probably have to win all 4 remaining rounds, and that's just not very probable. E4. It's MVL. What are we going to get? C5, of course. Knight C3. Okay, what are we going to get? We're going to get a little offbeat check. We're going to get a close Sicilian, a Grand Prix attack. No, we're actually going to get a queen venture out, and certainly you don't want to bring the queen back because that just wastes time, right? You would pin the... Oh. Okay, well, why would you block... Well, this is modern day chess, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually a very trendy anti-Sicilian. This is what it's called. It just takes an opponent out of theory, and then you develop your bishop out to b2. And this has been played. In fact, very good players have played this. Like myself, I played this about an hour ago in a blitz game, and I won in about 20 moves. And Magnus Carlsen, who is slightly, you know, he's about in the same league as I am. But, you know, it's Ali Reza Firouzja's played this, I believe. Many strong players have played this line. And for black, the critical move is actually this move. So normally you put the bishop on this square, but here you actually target the queen because it's just on a dumb square. And now we have f4, knight to f6, and bishop b2. In this position, there's another critical move, f5, which is just obscure, but it's very strong. I mean, you're trying to attack the center before putting the knight on f6, but knight f6. And it's interesting that Grishuk, who has not too much of a prize contention in this event, opens the door for MVL, right? When I saw this, I woke up around this position. It was like 7:40 in the morning here on the East Coast. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, Grishuk's giving MVL a chance to win with black. No one in this event has won with black yet. No one. I think like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 decisive games or something in the second half when the tournament has resumed. Black has not won. So it's interesting. And one more important note is that in this position, knight e2 has never been played. This position has been reached once by transposition, but now we have a completely new game, to quote another YouTube celebrity. a5, right? We have a5, and, well, MVL's trying to create some counterplay on this side of the board. Grishuk plays a4, so stopping any mobility on that side, and now Grishuk plays a modified crab. As you know, if you play a4, h4 at any given moment, you are playing the crab, he plays the modified crab. And then Grishuk just plays h5. And he's like, just take my pawn, because you have no convenient way to take it. In fact, if you take it like this, it's even worse. Doubled, isolated, h-pawns are a misery. And the way MVL plays it in the game, well, now g3. And now everything is guarded, and you really can't move. And I have a plan, and my plan is to maybe trade bishops, double everybody up, and g4 and slaughter you. Or bishop g2, bishop f3, and slaughter you. Or somehow get g4, f5, and slaughter you. Or put my knight on d5. You get what I'm trying to say, right? He's trying to crush him here. So now MVL says, I don't really like that, I'm going to play knight to b4. We have this plan in action to remove the light squared protector, and we're ready to go g4. We're ready to go g4 to the extent that we are also ready to sacrifice material. The knight goes back to f6, g5, knight h5, and f5. And if you look at this position optically, it looks like white is dominating. I mean, in fact, if I throw in one more move, f6, white's attack very clearly was faster. And this is an instructive game. I understand this is two super GMs playing, and it's sometimes hard to learn from them. Ladies and gentlemen, when you castle on opposite sides, be ready to pawn storm. When you castle on opposite sides, be ready to sacrifice a pawn or two. Not a queen, like you might, but a pawn or two, all right? Be ready to part ways, open up the lines for your rooks, for your pieces, and then play like this. Sometimes attacks don't need to end in checkmate. Sometimes an attack can end with the dominance of a piece. And in this position, we get knight to g3, looking to remove the final defender. But this gives MVL an opportunity to lash out with the move d5. He has to, because if he doesn't, like let's say, you know, just hypothetically, you get a position that looks like this. This bishop is in jail forever. Forever. That bishop is dead. So MVL doesn't want that, and so he just lashes out with d5, right? Now we get pawn takes, knight takes, takes, and MVL plays a very important move now as well. He plays this move h5. The point is, you can take en passant. You can. But in many positions, not in this one, because there's still ways for white to attack down the middle with the knight, for example, but in many positions, you can freeze an attack by making the pawns go first. If the pawns can sacrifice themselves, as I've just said, to open up the lines, that's beneficial. But if you can leave them there and just hide behind the enemy pawn, you're in good shape. But like I said, in this case, there's a knight, and that knight will kick you out. But if there was no knight, it would be very difficult. And Grishuk chooses not to take. Grishuk actually chooses to leave this pawn in the line of sight. It was better to take. Rook c5, rook h3, and now, Grishuk has misevaluated this completely. Now that MVL is going to get that center pawn, it's a totally different story. And Grishuk has to rotate over and just say, all right, I'm all in. I'm down a pawn, but I'm all in. Now we get queen to d6. We get king to a2, sidestepping any back rank shenanigans, right? Rook to d1. Rook to d1 anyway, and Grishuk sacks a rook. And he sacks a rook because after gh5, first of all, if you were to take, then I would just come back. You would accomplish nothing. Now we have rook h5. Isn't this incredible? You would think, oh, boom and boom, he's so smart. Wait a minute, wait a minute. No, 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 no. Don't be selfish. Rook h5. And now Grishuk is threatening a couple of things. He's threatening queen e4, queen h7. He's threatening queen h2, rook h8. He's threatening, I mean, that's basically it. There was no follow-up. And now the only move that doesn't lose the game. Simply the only move, rook d4, because you need to prevent queen e4. Now if queen to h2 were to be played, threatening mate, not there, threatening mate on that square, rook takes a4, and the game is a draw. MVL is just in time to prevent queen e4 and threaten an attack on the enemy king. After b takes a4, queen to e6, and it's a draw. There's no way for you to escape perpetual check. After king here, check, here, and queen b6. And it doesn't really matter where you move, I will always be able to check you. And sometimes that happens when each person is a move away from death. It's all things are perfectly balanced as they should be, and the game ends in a draw. However, Grishuk goes back to h1, takes, and goes here. He says, no rook for you. I'm not going to take. I'm still threatening mate. Queen to d5, queen to h5, and MVL is forced to sack the queen for the rook. But he has two of them. He has two rooks, and he plays rook g4. And rook g4 turns out to be a catastrophic mistake. If we go back just a couple of moves, I believe it was maybe this position. Rather than queen d5, MVL could have played rook to h4. And this is a crazy move. Its intended purpose is to sack a full rook, but trade queens. That is the idea. And you would end up in a position where one sole rook cannot do damage. And the pawns cannot do damage anymore, and the bishop is just kind of a bozo, because you're just going to take this pawn, and the bishop taking this pawn doesn't matter. That was his final chance, but MVL beelined for this position, and in this situation, simply blundered the fact that the bishop need not be protected. Queen takes pawn. And in positions where a queen is playing against two rooks, or rook and bishop, or rook and knight, every pawn is so important. And you're extremely important, and thank you for making it 18 minutes into my recap video. Why is it important? Because now you have a passed c-pawn. You did not have that before, and soon you will pick off the a-pawn, because once its friend dies, it's coming next. It's going to be next. And you say, well, why can't he take the bishop? Check. And by virtue of geometry, I will hit you with a fork wherever you move the king. Now this triangle is what? Isosceles? Is that equal? That's not equilateral. That's isosceles, because two sides are the same. You see, I didn't pay much attention in school. I was mostly playing chess, but I'm pretty sure it's an isosceles triangle. And if I'm not right, obviously you have to let me know in the comments below. You're gonna win this rook. So instead of that, MVL goes forward, but he's just not fast enough. His counterplay is too slow. And even though he can get the queen and a pawn for the two rooks, this endgame is lost. It's just lost. Why? Because I move my king, because I move my bishop to protect the pawn, and you can't win this. You're not fast enough. You can go here, you can go here, it doesn't matter. You say, well, why isn't MVL just like going here, man? Because here. Well, why is he just not? Because he's just gonna, because if you do this, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever heard of a square, speaking of geometry? Well, in chess, you need your king in this box. 2 squares away from promotion, and 2 squares this way. And that's where this king needs to be. And it's far! It's like when you tell someone you'll be there in 5 minutes, you still haven't left the damn house. You know who you are. So king f5, king c4, king e6, and it was on move 48 that MVL had had enough. Now, what is interesting about this position is that apparently in this position, there was still a chance for MVL. Now, according to the engines, it doesn't work. But MVL and Grishuk both saw this, and the commentators saw this, and that move is bishop a3, threatening that if king takes, you have this. So you're obviously going to go here. And the difference is the bishop gets out, and the king can go this way. The king can go this way. Now, the table base would need to evaluate this position. And you know, the point is that now the bishop actually has a lot more mobility. It's constantly threatening to go there, so the king needs to stay close. But Grishuk said afterwards in his interview that on move 40, he did not leave for his usual smoke break because he wanted MVL to play these moves quickly to get to this position. He wanted to kind of sit at the board and have MVL, you know, playing fast and in the moment, which is interesting. But ultimately, MVL missed that chance. It would have been a close chance to make a draw. And he loses, and that's big. That is big for the standings because with Nepo picking up points, and we have one more game to look at. So, big win for Grishuk, playing the role of spoiler. And now our final game of the day, we will end with fan favorite Anish Giri. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6. When you play Ding Liren, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a Rue Lopez. You're going to get this variation of it. And here we have a choice. White can play this position classical with rook E1, pawn to C3, pawn to D4, pawn to H3. White can play, you know, these lines where you play A4 and A5. Or white can play this. You say, well, that's an obvious move, bishop takes knight. But if you wanted to do that, why wouldn't you do that here? Why would you delay? Well, you're basically saying black has already committed their bishop, except they haven't because Ding Liren goes here. This is what you're trying to do. You are trying to get just a game. And I'm quoting Max Warmerdam, who's a Dutch grandmaster working on the team of Anish Giri. He was interviewed by Chess.com's live broadcast, and he said, the point of this line is to just get a game. And just get a game they did. They left known territory here, like around this moment when Anish played Queen E2. You say, wait a minute, look at that knight journey. Boop, boop, boop. Anish's knight just takes a stroll and plants itself on A5 with vision on B7 and pressure here, and you cannot kick me out. This is a mistake many beginners make. They attack something forgetting that thing used to guard something else. Ding Liren doesn't make that mistake. And in many ways, this was genius. In many ways, this was a genius idea because it forces black to castle long. And what do we know about opposite side castling? You can very well expect a pawn avalanche, pawn storm coming on both sides. You can feel it. The storm is coming, right? So bishop G4, C3, C5, A3. What is Anish doing? He's waiting to lash out. And he doesn't have to wait much longer. B4. Because Ding needs to create defensive situation. Like, he needs to kind of bunker down. He needs to set everything and then go for the attack, right? So bishop to C7, attacking the knight comes back, and knight D7. Ding has moved the pieces out of the way, and now Ding will try to attack. So we have H3, bishop H5, bishop E3, and F5. And again, to the untrained eye, that just looks like the blunder of a pawn, but it's not, because here Ding would lash out with C4, so now you come from both sides, and you get all of Anish's pawns out of the center, and bam. And now we see the power of the bishop, and Anish is simply lost. So of course, when F5 happens, Anish doesn't take it, right? He plays bishop takes C5. He grabs that pawn with tempo, hitting the queen, and now the queen moves out of the way, lurking on this square. We have rook to B1, anticipating that at some point this will open up and the rook will be useful. At this point, for the life of me, I cannot understand why Ding Liren did not take this pawn. Maybe he didn't like the fact that after, for example, Queen E4, like if you take, and then take, and then take, and then take, white is a pawn up. Like, white is a pawn up. If you count the pawns, white has 7 and black has 6. 7 is more than 6. And maybe he didn't like this. Maybe he didn't like the fact his rook couldn't make it here and attack anything because of the bishop. But Anish would have no attack, and Anish would have a very damaged structure now, right? He didn't do it. Instead, Ding just went all in. He just, and again, like, you know, it looks like you can't take because your queen would hang. But really, that's actually not the problem. The problem is this, because that queen was hanging too. The problem is that you're going to get laser beamed on this side of the board. Like, I'm just going to go here and you're dead. You just cannot, right? So sometimes taking these G-pawns can be poisonous. So now Anish takes on F5, because now E4 has a lot less venom since there's a pawn there. And now, rather than taking back on F5, again, a move that just looks very natural, we get G4 from Ding Liren. And I think he missed the power of Anish's idea, knight to G5. He didn't miss that move, but he might have missed the power of the very simple move h4. And that move glues the knight in, and black has no attacking pieces. This bishop is blocked, and if you just go g3, I just take your bishop, okay? A lot of beginners also forget that. Just because the bishop attacks the queen also sees the bishop, right? So the bishop over here is stuck. The knight is not involved in the attack. What, this? I mean, who's the queen attacking? Nobody. Uh-oh. And now Ding Liren, it's not the first mistake that kills you in chess. It's often the second one. So we get b6. And Anish Giri here does not retreat the bishop. Anish Giri plays a very non-Anish Giri move. And he plays it fast. Knight to e4. And it was at this moment that Daniel Dubov during the broadcast said, oh wow, Anish is going to win a very nice game. And it was at this moment that Ding Liren realized he messed up. Because after b takes c5, Anish has no threat yet, but it's coming. And that's why he played rook b1 a long time ago. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the final act. We have knight to f6, and Anish Giri gets on his horse and jumps in. Now black is forced to take because it was a fork. cd6, rook d6, and again, it looks like white has no attackers. But this very important move, one pawn move, pawn to d4, exposes all of the problems of black's position. Black is stuck behind his own pawn. Like, black is constantly a move too slow. If black can play g3 here, and you just can't take, I just disallow you from playing this move, black is in business. But that's the whole point. That's why d4 is so good. You open the window for the queen, and now after c5, just knight takes c5. Ding was trying to defend his pawn with the rook here by sacrificing. But knight c5, rook e8, and just queen c4. And again, if for something like g3, queen b2, the problem of putting the rook there, when it all opened up, it was the rook that was the MVP of the entire game. So after rook e8, queen c4, Ding Liren resigned. If we back up like 6 moves, really, it was 8 moves. It was 8 moves. It was on move 20 that the move g4 happened, and it spiraled out of control. It was already getting questionable with g5. It was a bit of a speculative move, but if queen f5 was played, he would have maintained this pressure. Even something like g4 here from Anish wouldn't make sense. You can't fork these pieces because you would just be, you know, digging your own grave. King h1, e4, the bishop opens, and, you know, you're just dead. So this move g4, very nice idea by Anish, just realizing that he doesn't need to do much. He just needs to respond to his opponent. For example, if h6 were to be played here, you want this anyway. And now if g3, and the queen is guarding now, that's great, that's very nice, I'm very happy for you. I just moved my queen. Sometimes attacks look scarier than they are. Okay, you take with check? Yeah, who's attacking who, buddy? Right? Like, you know, you hit a bee's nest, what's gonna happen? And Anish Giri just wins a beautiful game, queen c4, and it's the final move. And with that, we gotta take a look at our standings. After 11 rounds of the FIDE candidates, Jan Nepomniachtchi has 7 points, but Anish Giri is half a point away. Now, important, Anish has already played him twice. Tomorrow, Anish is playing with black against Fabiano Caruana. That is probably the biggest game of the tournament. MVL has a game against Nepo. That is the last round of the tournament, but he's a point and a half away. Now, if MVL were to beat Nepo in that game and tie him, the #1 tiebreak of this event is the head-to-head score. The problem for Anish is he already lost to Nepo once. Anish cannot tie with Nepo in the standings. He needs to have a higher score. So that's what we are looking at going into the rounds 12, 13, and 14. 3 rounds to go, ladies and gentlemen, and we will know who the next challenger to the throne is.